Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Write Your Path podcast. My name is Lolly Spindler, and I will be your host on this new journey we are embarking on together. My intention for this podcast is to just have fun and explore. So we will just be doing and trying and exploring lots of new things together. Some will be solo episodes with just me. Others I will have guests on, people that I admire and I love, so we can share ideas and learn more about their journeys. And some I'm just going to kind of riff and stream of consciousness and see what comes through. So the purpose of this episode is just to introduce you to me and why I'm starting the Write Your Path podcast in the first place. Like I said, my name is Lolly. I am 37 years old and live in Mexico City. And how I got here was through a series of twists and turns. But currently I am a freelance writer. I am a book doula and I am a writing coach. And I help guide people on their writing journeys, whether they're just getting started and having trouble identifying as a writer and need to kind of, get through that mental block of imposter syndrome and self-doubt to truly accept that identity for themselves. I also help writers who are more seasoned and ready to start writing for other people and building a business around their writing. And I teach them how to build and scale a successful six-figure freelance writing business. I also help people bring their books to life. So this is where the term book doula comes in, because you are really birthing a book. It is not like for the weak of heart. It's basically therapy, what I do. So it's really helping people translate their ideas for a book into something that's feasible and reasonable for the page and that people will actually read and enjoy. So those are my three primary modus operandi, I would say. My three main projects that I am currently working on. And the reason I am starting this podcast and the reason I named it the Write Your Path podcast is because writing has really allowed me to create and live a very intentional life. Through the power of my pen, I have been able to build a six-figure freelance writing business, which has also allowed me for a source of passive income, which I will share about in a later episode, that allows me to basically know that I'm stable, that I have this financial stability and foundation that I can then build on by having fun, creating new programs, offering new things to other creatives and writers out there who really are looking to express themselves. So I wanted to start this podcast because it's another kind of fun medium that I can share my story. I have been a guest on many a podcast before, but have always wanted to have my own as a way to share things in a different, new, exciting, fun way. And I'm all about storytelling. I'm actually thinking about creating an offer around storytelling. And so I thought, screw it. Let's try a new form and a new medium of storytelling via podcasting. So here I am. And I really want this podcast to be interactive. So, if you are listening to this and want to comment or, write to me on Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever you find me, I would really love to hear from you and kind of learn more about your experience during the lifetime of this podcast and also what you want to hear more about. So basically, some of the things we will be covering on this podcast is kind of like that mindset element of really digging into those limiting beliefs that are holding us back from living the life that we want. Because as an entrepreneur for over 10 years, this is something that comes up a lot for me. I honestly think being an entrepreneur is one of the most intense growth experiences and spiritual experiences that you can have as a human being in this lifetime, because you're really forced to confront a lot of things that, if you just stayed in your comfort zone in a comfy 9-to-5 for your whole life, you probably wouldn't have to look so directly in the face of some of these of these things that come up during the entrepreneurial journey. So I really want to dive into a lot of that. I also really want to dive into the act of writing and the power of writing as a healing tool, some of the practices I use, like journaling, that have really allowed me to go deeper into my own spiritual journey and healing journey. And also the more actionable side of writing and being able to harness it as a way to create financial freedom for yourself. So it's going to be a very multifaceted journey we're going to be on. But yeah, that is the long and short of what this podcast is intended to be. So I really hope you enjoy what is to come, and welcome. Thank you for being here. So how did I end up at 37 in Mexico City as a professional writer, book doula, and coach? So my journey began in Southern California in Long Beach. I grew up between LA and Orange County, Seal Beach and Long Beach, basically, or hover between Orange County and LA County. And I had a beautiful childhood. You know, I am one of those late 80s millennials, so I got to grow up without social media and without a cell phone, which was a blessing. And you know, my days were filled with school and sports and coming home and playing at the cul-de-sac with like the neighborhood kids, like such your you know, movie Americana upbringing. I was very privileged to have an incredible loving family. I still do. And I really was allowed, even from a young age, to kind of explore myself and different paths. I started Taekwondo when I was 5. I was the only girl at the studio. I got to beat up on little boys. It was a lot of fun. So from a young age, I was like, oh, like, I can not only do what all these boys can do, I could do better than them because they're on the mat and I'm still standing. So that will tell you a lot about who I am if you don't know me already. From there, I got into soccer, I got into acting and singing, and my parents were so supportive and just let me kind of fly. They let me be free to discover and explore all of these different aspects of myself. I played piano. I started writing when I was younger, and they got me a writing coach. My 4th grade teacher, Mr. Swanson, I love him so much. I still talk to him. So it was really lovely because I never felt pigeonholed. I never felt like I could only do one thing and I would only be supported in one thing, and all of my time had to go into one thing. And so I always had this beautiful breadth of interests and support when it came to those interests. So that definitely shaped me at a very young age to keep exploring and to keep trying new things. And that's a practice I continue to this day. So yeah, that is basically like how I was raised. It was really beautiful. I was, you know, a straight A student in school. I, you know, still battling that perfectionism today. And you know, I loved school. I loved my teachers. I actually still, like I just said, I still talk to my 4th grade teacher. I still talk to my high school Spanish teacher. Like, he comes to visit me here in Mexico City. I really thrived in that environment, and I loved my extracurriculars, and all of my sports. And then when it came to college and higher education, I had gone to Boston with my mom and my sister when I was in middle school, and I fell in love with Boston at first sight. I was like, wow, like, it's such a college town. I think there's like, I'm going to get this stat wrong, but there's like over 20 colleges like within like the greater Boston area. So it's just full of students and creativity and learning. Also great sports team. Shout out Red Sox. Yeah, so like the first time I went, I was young, but I was immediately like, yes, like I need to go here. And my sister actually ended up staying in Southern California and went to University of San Diego. But I told my mom when we got back from that trip in 8th grade, I was like, Mom, just so you know, like I will be going to school in Boston. And she was like, Lolly, you're in 8th grade. There's no way you could know that. And I was like, okay, well, I'm just preparing you now to let you know I will be going across the country for school. And that's exactly what I did. So I attended Boston University. And because Spanish had been my favorite subject in high school, and when we were applying for Boston University, you have to basically pick your major when you're applying in order to see what of the 7 colleges you will be attending. So like there's College of General Studies, College of Arts and Sciences, School of Management, journalism, fine arts. So I had no idea. So I was like, all right, Spanish is my favorite subject. I guess I will be a Hispanic language and literature major. And guess what? I never changed my major. Ever since I was 18 and a high school senior, I kept that major for my 4 years of college. And I ended up graduating with a Hispanic language and literature bachelor's degree, and then a minor in women's studies and a minor in religion. And I studied Eastern religions, so Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, which will come into play later because now I just attended the biggest Hindu festival in the history of the world, the Mahakumbh Mela, but we will talk about that later on. So it's kind of funny how some of these seeds, and now obviously I tell my mom, look, I'm using my degree because I live in Mexico City and I speak Spanish every day, all day. So these things ended up coming back in the long run, and they still serve me to this day. So my 4 years in college was also an incredible experience. I met a lot of people I still love and talk to this day. I also finally felt safe and free to express my activism. Looking back, like I was always like a baby feminist, but that was like a scary word when I was younger, and especially growing up in Orange County, which is predominantly conservative. I didn't really feel safe identifying as a feminist, and it wasn't until I went to college and really learned what that term is and was. I mean, it's a continuing evolving term. That I finally felt safe adopting it for myself, and from that kind of grew my activism. While I was there, I helped found the Women's Center on campus that is now the Center for Gender, Sexuality, and Activism. It's still there. It's still kicking. I actually was just talking to the current directors recently. So yeah, I really loved college. I really found a place to express my activism. I also got to have my first gigs writing professionally. So my first professional role was for the Boston Weekly Dig, which is like, if you've ever seen like the LA Weekly, it's basically like a free weekly newspaper for like major cities. And so since I was familiar with it, living in Long Beach in LA County, when I got to Boston, I immediately was like, oh, it's a weekly. Like, I love these. They always have like all of the upcoming gigs in the music section. They have like the horoscope section. They have Dan Savage's Savage Love section. I still listen to him every week. He has a great podcast. And so I had my first internship actually at the Boston Weekly Dig. I was working in their music department, basically like writing up gigs. And I also did some news stories for them. The toll hike on the Pike was like my claim to fame. That's like my first big gig, which is literally about a price increase on the turnpike in Massachusetts. Super exciting. And after that, I got an internship at undergroundhiphop.com, which sadly no longer exists. But it was basically the website for like all the backpack rapper, like hip hop heads who loved like Atmosphere and Living Legends and Brother Ali. That's like where all of us were hanging out. And it was basically like a giant online forum, but we also had news stories. So I wrote the news stories, and I also got to interview some amazing artists. Like Ninth Wonder was my first interview, who was incredible. Highly recommend that you listen to him if you have never done so. He's produced hit songs for Mary J. Blige, Jay-Z, Merce, like you name it, he's been there. And I also got to go backstage at a lot of hip hop shows during my college years. So that was an added bonus of writing for the music industry. So those were my first two professional writing gigs when I was in college. And it was great because I'm all about, like I said earlier, trying new things, dipping my toe into new fields and seeing if it's a fit or not, because I think it's just as important to know what you don't want as it is to know what you want. So, for example, like I loved writing about the music industry. It was really interesting to me because I was passionate about it, one, but I got to learn so much more about what's behind the music that I'd been listening to for years. And that was really rewarding. Whereas more of like the newsy stuff, like the Toll Hike on the Pike, didn't really speak to me. I'm like not a big news person. Like I don't really need to be caught up on like local affairs. So it was great experience. And I am like still so grateful for the people who took me under their wing and like, you know, taught me the ropes. And this is how you interview someone. And this is how you go up to random strangers at a town hall and like ask them questions with your little handheld recorder. And like all of this industry knowledge that was passed down to me was really beautiful. So upon graduation, I told my parents, guys, like you spent a lot of money on this degree, you know, like I have to use it. So that being my excuse, I moved to Madrid, Spain for 2 years. I had studied abroad there for a semester my junior year, and I loved it. I had first visited when I was still in high school. I was 16 years old, and I went with my Spanish and French department of my high school. So we did a couple days in London, and then we went to France for a week so the French kids could practice, and then we went to Spain for a week so the Spanish students could practice. And I fell in love with Madrid, just like I had fallen in love with Boston a few years earlier. I fell in love with Madrid. And same thing happened. I came home from that trip and I told my mom, hey, I'm going to be living in Madrid at some point. And once again, she's like, Lolly, you are 16 years old. You don't know what you want. Like, what are you talking about? And I was like, okay, I'm just warning you, it's going to happen. And sure enough, my intuition has always been really strong, especially when it comes to physical spaces and like cities around the world. Like my intuition will be like, this is where you need to be because magic is going to happen here. So figure it out and get your ass back here. So those were my first two examples of, you know, hearing my intuition and actually listening to it and following it. So after graduating, I moved to Madrid, Spain. I did a program called Auxiliares de Conversación, which is the North American Language and Cultural Assistance Program. I actually think it still exists, basically because Spain's level of English is far behind most other European countries. They were trying to figure out how can we catch up. So they implemented this program, which basically takes native English speakers from around the world, the US, Canada, Australia. One of my friends, it was Serbian, and basically brought all these people to Spain and had them work in public schools around the country. So you basically, it was like, think of a college, think of a residency matching program for doctors. So you put like your top 3 med schools and then they put their top candidates and then you see if you match. So that's basically what we did, but for regions of Spain. So I picked Madrid and thankfully I got Madrid, but Madrid is a big region. It's not just the city. So my school was actually an hour outside of the city that we commuted to every single day. An hour like in a bus every day. But it was so worth it. I was 22 to 24 when I was there. Wow, those were some crazy fun years. I learned so much. I made some lifelong friendships. I actually still go back to Madrid once a year, every year, to go visit I call them my family there because I hold those people so near and dear to my heart because I grew so much. You know, it was my first time living abroad. It was my first time in a place where I didn't speak the language, I didn't know the culture. I had to just kind of figure out how to do all the things, like rent an apartment for the first time, find a job, all in a foreign language. So it was a huge growth experience for me. So the people I met during that time have like obviously stuck with me till today because, trauma bonding is a thing. No, I'm just kidding. But kind of a little bit, yeah. But honestly, it was beautiful. But I realized, and I love children. I love them. I love playing with them. But that's the thing. I don't necessarily like disciplining them. So when it came to like having to discipline kids and like be the non-fun person in the room, I didn't like that. Like, I prefer to be like the lighthearted, let's go to recess and play a game, or let's practice this for the school play or for the talent show. That's much more my role. I had been a camp counselor many a time up to that point. And so I was kind of like, that's what I was used to. I'm not used to like the more disciplined structure environment of the classroom. So that was definitely a learning experience. And I realized, if I want to be around kids and continue to enjoy them, I can't teach them. So after 2 years, I decided like I was no longer going to teach children. I would have loved to have stayed in Spain, but our program was for 2 years max in that region. And then if you wanted to stay for longer, you had to change regions. But that didn't really make sense because, all of my friends and at that point family were in Madrid. So after those 2 years, I came back to California. And that was when I really had to do a lot of introspection and kind of figure out what the hell I wanted to do with my life, right? I had this degree in Hispanic language and literature, which I didn't really know what to do with other than speak and read and write Spanish. I had always been a writer, but, had those internships were my only professional experience. I didn't really know what to do with that. So for a year when I got back, I was tutoring. I actually had a really lovely experience where I would help kids in the Long Beach school district whose parents didn't speak any English. So I would go over to their homes and I would help them with their homework and then clue in the parents on like what the kids were working on at school. So that was actually a really lovely experience and I really enjoyed that. But I knew it wasn't sustainable. I knew that I needed something to give me more of a financial base and a foundation so that I could start to make some actual money. And, I'd been a teacher for 2 years. Like, we didn't make much money at all, as we know. Teachers don't make shit. So I really needed to get my footing and figure out, all right, I need to be making some money to figure out what I actually want to do. So during that time, a good friend from high school actually reached out to me and was like, hey, I just got hired by this real estate company to start their social media team. And he's like, we need a writer and I know you can write. So would you be interested? And I was like, well, yeah, that sounds great. But I don't know anything about real estate. And he's like, you know what? I don't really either. So we're just going to learn the industry together on the job. And I was like, all right, I'm down. Let's do this. So it was Kyle and I, who's my friend from high school, who hired me. And we hired another guy named Jesse to be our graphic designer for all the visuals we needed for social media. So it was the three of us were this team. We had a lot of fun. We made the best of a not great situation. So this was a very old school traditional company where everyone was in a cubicle and basically they were selling real estate microsites to realtors based on the counties they worked in, which is a total black hat SEO tactic now, but back then it was still working. The company has since gone out of business because it wasn't the greatest business model, but at the time it was working for SEO. So, they rode that train for as long as they could. And so we were in charge of creating content, not just for real estate agents to get them to purchase these microsites, but for real estate buyers and sellers, the consumers, to then push them as leads to these realtor sites. So we were basically a content machine. I was writing 6 blog posts a week, 3 for the realtor side, 3 for the consumer side. And we were just blasting out so much content. And we actually ended up being very successful. We had tons of views from Pinterest. That was like our number one source of traffic. And we did pretty well, like starting from scratch and none of us really knowing what the hell we were doing. And that year was also really great because it gave me a whole year to learn what the heck digital marketing and inbound marketing was. I had no concept of what that was, at all when I took this job. And so we basically used HubSpot because it has like a free school. I highly recommend if you're interested in learning about any type of online marketing. We used HubSpot to basically teach ourselves everything about inbound marketing, digital marketing, what the hell is paid, organic, owned, SEO, and how do we incorporate on-site SEO? How do we do this with visuals? Blah, 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 blah. What is a meta tag? Like all of the lingo. We learned everything on the job. And so it really served as a school for me for a year. And so even though the job wasn't great and I was really unhappy because I was like stuck at a desk for like 8 hours of the day and like hating my life, especially after coming back from Spain and totally having the worst reverse culture shock of my life. It was a good experience in the sense that I really learned a lot and it actually set me up for the future. Because after a year of working there and being like, why am I commuting 30 minutes a day to a job where I'm on a computer all day? Like, this doesn't make sense. I could do this from home. I could do this from anywhere. I don't really interact with my team. Like, sure, we like talk, but like we could do that online. Like, we really don't need to be in person at an office to get this job done. So I had proposed to like our boss's boss, hey, what do you think about like letting us work from home 1 day a week just to like trial test it out and see what happens? But this company was so old school, so traditional, so close-minded. They were like, hell no. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to blow my fucking brains out if I stay one more day at this fucking sad ass office. So I decided that was it. I was done. And I figured, if I learned all these skills and am creating a ton of content and generating a ton of traffic for an industry I didn't know anything about a year ago, I can do this for any industry. So I left that company and I started Crea Content Marketing, my content writing, freelance writing, content marketing, copy editing, social media marketing business over 10 years ago now. And I really just dove in. I had no idea what I was doing. I had never obviously started a business before, but I knew I could write. And now I also knew a lot about marketing. So I was lucky enough to find my first few clients at a co-working space in downtown Long Beach. They were called We Labs. They no longer, well, they do exist. They just have a different name because WeWork came in and, basically took their name. But they were there first. And I met amazing people at this co-working space. I got my first clients, and my business just really took off and I was really excited. But at the same time, I had a couple clients, but freelancing isn't the most stable if you don't know what you're doing. And I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to generate consistent revenue every month. So I was like, all right, in the interim, while I figure out how to do this, I'm going to get another full-time job, but this time it's going to be remote because there's no way I'm ever going back to working in an office. Like, my soul was dying. I cannot do that. So I actually took on another full-time role with a company called Zoombi, also no longer exists. They were a new inbound marketing startup, and it was just the two founders, and they hired me as their content marketing manager. So I would write content. Again, I was a little content machine for all of their clients and for us and for the company. So I was doing, again, probably at least 6 blog posts a week. And I was with them for a couple years. And I was like, you know what? Like, I love working remotely. Like, I'm productive. This is working for me. I still have like my clients on the side if I need a little extra income. And around that time, my friend had sent me this program, a work travel program called Remote Year, and said, hey, Lolly, I saw this and I immediately thought of you. And I was like, what is this thing? And basically, Remote Year was one of the first companies for people who were working remotely so they could travel the world while working. And Remote Year handled all of the accommodation, they handled the travel between destination cities. They covered the co-working space and local events. So local networking events, just different kind of touristy events. So I was like, oh my God, this is a dream. And at the time, I would say it was a little bit more than what I was paying for rent for the monthly fee for this travel work program. So I went to my boss and I was like, look, I've been working remotely for you guys successfully for almost 2 years. Now I want to do that, but I want to travel at the same time. What do you think? And they said, yes, go for it. And I was like, look, I'm not going to be working your hours. Like, hell no, am I going to be working at night when I'm in like Thailand? But I will promise to get all my shit done. And so they went for it. And so in September of 2016, I left on Remote Year. We spent a month in every city. We were there and then we would move. So we were in Asia for 3 months. We were in Europe for 3 months. And then we were in North and Central and South America for 6 months. And literally doing this program changed my life. Not just because it is what was my first introduction to Mexico City, which is where I live now and is my forever home. It also was the community. Literally to this day, I'm still meeting people who have done Remote Year, literally just like while out to drinks or being connected by other friends. And it's like, wow, you did this crazy fucking thing. Like, we must have something in common that you would just leave your life and pack up everything and go abroad for a year. And so those are some of my lifelong friends. I'll definitely dive into Remote Year more in another episode, but it was just, wow, like what an incredible life-changing experience. Not only for the crazy, beautiful travel things that happen, but because it showed me that I could maintain my work ethic and my productivity and my financial stability while living my best fucking life. Like, they weren't mutually exclusive. I could travel and see the world and still have the growth and the stability that I wanted in my business. So what ended up happening during Remote Years, about 2 months in, Zumbi, that company I'd been working for full time for the past 2 years, basically called me and were like, hey, we're going under. Like, no 2-week notice, nothing. You don't have a job starting today. And I was like, I just pitched you this travel work program that's a year long. And this is month 2. Like, what are you talking about? And basically they were like, sorry, we probably should have told you earlier, but we didn't. And I was just like, holy shit. Thankfully, though, I had started Crea Content Marketing, my freelance writing company prior to that. And I still had a couple clients. And so I was like, thank God I had started this business before I left on a Remote Year, because I would have been absolutely screwed if I had just lost my full-time job when I was just starting this incredible adventure that would change the course of my life. So I was able to leverage the clients I already had and be like, hey guys, like, if you have more work for me, please send it my way. If you know somebody else who needs content, please send it my way. And also people on my program, I was like, hey y'all, if you know anyone, and actually another guy on my program, Dave, was working for his friend who had just started a startup and who needed content. And that one client basically like got me through the rest of Remote Year. And I was so grateful. And actually that client ended up being like, we're still friends to this day. He's a lovely guy. And it was actually a blessing in disguise that I ended up losing that full-time job, because instead of feeling this need to like be online and be part of, show up for this company, for Zumbi every single day, now I was like, oh wait, now I actually get to like detach a little from work and actually enjoy where I am and be present and actually get to to really immerse myself in the local culture of where I am. So it was totally a blessing in disguise. I basically would just like knock out my work for my freelancing clients, and then I'd be like, all right, now I can go spend the day doing this crazy fun thing that I would have never been able to do had I still had a full-time job. So ever since then, Crea has been my number one. It has been my baby business has grown so much. I was working as little as possible during remote year, like I said, so that I could just really enjoy the experience. And then once that year ended and I came to Mexico City, I was like, all right, like now I really gotta grow some legs for this business. So I really like buckled down and grew my business and went from making 20K to over 100K in 5 years. So I really was able to, figure out what worked and what didn't for me in building my business, and the work I loved doing, the work I didn't love so much, the clients I loved working with, the clients I was not such a fan of. And figuring out all of these things is like part of anybody's entrepreneurial journey, right? And just giving yourself the time and the space to really focus on that, like that is so important. And that's really what Mexico City allowed me when I moved here in 2017. So that is basically how I ended up in Mexico City. And it was actually also a remote year person who invited me to come live in their house in Mexico City upon completion of my program. And, I thought I was going to be here for a month, and then it was 3 months. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to move back to Europe. And I went for a couple weeks and I was like, what am I doing? Like everything I want is in Mexico City, the community, the art scene, the music scene, the food, like, oh my God, what am I doing? Like I'm supposed to be in Mexico City. So once again, my gut was like, girl, you know where you need to be. And so thankfully I listened, and I'm still here almost 8 years later. So that brings me to where I'm at now. Like the past 8 years, I've really been growing into my business, and I started another business because I realized after doing what I've been doing for 10 years, I really wanted to teach other people how to build a beautiful lifestyle that they loved living and were excited to get up every morning and do work that they wanted to do and just live a life that they had dreamt of. Like I get to wake up and have slow mornings and work out every day and come back and have like a beautiful coffee and then start working at 12, and maybe I work 4 to 6 hours. I take breaks to have like beautiful lunches, and then I try to go see a friend a day. Like I've just created this really beautiful, intentional life that I really want to share with other people now. And that's one reason I started Write Your Path coaching, and now this podcast, to basically share my tools with how do you build an intentional life, and not just the action-oriented items of like building and scaling a business, but the mindset too of how do I get myself to a place where I'm okay asking for what I want and going after what I want, because we really need to get there before we can get to the let's make an action plan, right? So that's what I'll be sharing in this new journey of this podcast. So I just really want to thank you all for being here and for listening to my story, and I will see you guys next time to share more of the magic. Ciao.